Captain Drake watched the reports come in from intercepted transmissions. The Urdok were confused, but not yet afraid. That would change soon. "Target the next patrol group," he ordered. "Let's make them understand what they've started." The hunt had begun. The Urdok Empire had ruled the stars for centuries. They had fought wars, crushed rebellions, and conquered entire civilizations without ever knowing fear. But something was different now. Something unseen moved through their space, striking without warning, leaving nothing behind but silence. At first, they dismissed it as bad luck, mechanical failures, pirate attacks, a series of coincidences that meant nothing. But as the days passed and more warships vanished, whispers began to spread. The Urdok High Command grew restless, issuing orders to tighten security. More patrols, more scans, more weapons, but none of it mattered. Because Nemesis was already inside their territory, and it had no intention of leaving. Captain Elias Drake sat in his command chair, watching as the latest Urdok warship blinked off the radar. Another kill. Another step toward their goal. His crew moved like ghosts around him, their faces calm, their hands steady. They all knew what this mission was. This wasn't war. This was a message. Drake turned to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Mira Vasquez. "Any transmissions?" She shook her head. They didn't even get a chance to call for help, just like the others. Drake exhaled slowly. The Urdok still didn't know what was hitting them. Their fleets were designed for large-scale warfare, massive ships, overwhelming firepower, brute force. But Nemesis was something different. It was small, fast, silent, deadly. It moved through enemy space like a shadow, slipping past defenses undetected, striking with pinpoint precision. By the time the Urdok realized they were being hunted, it would be too late. And that was the plan. A new report flashed onto the main screen. Another Urdok patrol was approaching, unaware that they were flying straight into the jaws of death. Drake leaned forward. "Engage the cloaking field. Get us in close." Nemesis drifted silently through the void, invisible to the Urdok's outdated sensors. The enemy ships moved in formation, confident, unafraid. They still believed they ruled these stars, a mistake they would not live long enough to regret. The moment Nemesis was within range, Vasquez activated the attack sequence. The Urdok warships never saw it coming. The first ship's engines flickered, then died. Within seconds, its entire power grid failed, leaving it adrift in the cold darkness. The crew scrambled, shouting in their guttural language, trying to restart systems that refused to obey. Panic set in. Then the second ship was hit. Its communication array vanished in a burst of silent energy, cutting it off from the rest of the fleet. Isolated, vulnerable, Drake gave the final order. End them. Nemesis struck with terrifying precision. The first ship's hull cracked open, venting its crew into space. The second ship simply disappeared, as if something had reached out from the abyss and swallowed it whole. No explosions, no debris, just silence. By the time the third Urdok ship tried to retreat, it was already dead. Drake sat back, watching as the remains of the enemy patrol drifted into the void. Another victory. Another warning. Vasquez exhaled. They're going to notice soon. They won't ignore this forever. Drake nodded. Good. We want them to notice. Because fear was the real weapon here. Not firepower. Not brute strength. Fear. And Nemesis was very, very good at making people afraid. Deep within the Urdok High Command, the first seeds of doubt had begun to take root. Reports of missing ships were piling up. The fleet commanders were whispering among themselves, uneasy, unsettled. Something was hunting them, something they could not see, could not detect, could not fight. Commander Valric stood at the center of the war room, his claws digging into the metal table as he read the latest report. Another 3 ships gone. No distress calls, no wreckage, just nothing. This wasn't war. This was annihilation. A lesser officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, I believe this is the work of the humans." Valric turned slowly, his golden eyes burning with fury. Ridiculous. But was it? The thought clawed at the back of his mind. The humans had sent them a message. Return him, or face the consequences. And now ships were vanishing. Could it really be them? Valric crushed the report in his fist. No, impossible. Humans were weak. Their fleets were primitive. They had no warships capable of this. And yet, something was out there. Valric straightened. Send more ships. Double the patrols. If something is hunting us, then we will hunt it. His officers nodded, moving quickly to carry out his orders. But Valric felt the unease lingering in the air. The doubt. The fear. And that made him angry. He would not let fear control the Urdok Empire. Nemesis listened. Hidden deep within Urdok space, the ship's advanced scanners intercepted every transmission, every desperate command from the enemy's high command. They were afraid now. It was in their voices, in their actions. They were scrambling, sending more ships, trying to fight something they didn't understand. Drake leaned back in his chair, studying the intercepted messages. They know something's out here. Vasquez smirked, but they don't know what. And that was the key. Nemesis was a ghost, a myth, a whisper in the dark. The Urdok could send 1,000 ships, but it wouldn't matter. They weren't fighting an army. They were fighting fear itself. Drake tapped the screen. We moved deeper, closer to their core systems. Vasquez hesitated. You think they'll break? Drake's eyes were cold. They took one of ours. We'll show them what happens when you do that. Nemesis turned, vanishing into the darkness once more. The hunt was far from over. The Urdok Empire had always ruled through fear and strength. Their war fleets crushed civilizations. Their soldiers marched into worlds unchallenged. They had never known an enemy that could stand against them. Until now. Deep within their own territory, something was hunting them. Something they could not see. At first, they had dismissed the missing ships as anomalies. Now they were sending distress signals. Desperate, terrified messages that ended in silence. The Urdok fleet was supposed to be the most powerful in this region of space, yet ships were vanishing like prey in the dark. And no one knew how. Captain Elias Drake sat in the dim glow of Nemesis's control room, watching another Urdok patrol disappear from the ship's scanners. Another clean strike. Another lesson. Vasquez turned from the weapons console. They're starting to panic. Drake studied the intercepted messages. The Urdok were sending out emergency alerts, ordering all ships to move in tighter formations, to travel with backup. It wouldn't help. Fear had already taken hold. They're trying to adapt, Drake said. They think more ships means more safety. Vasquez gave a dark chuckle. They're wrong. Nemesis didn't fight fair. It didn't engage in open battles. It didn't need overwhelming force. It was precision. Shadows. Terror. Drake's fingers tapped the console. We take out the next squadron before they reach their rally point. Lieutenant Vasquez nodded. Lining up the shot, the Urdok squadron consisted of 6 warships, each bristling with heavy weapons. Normally, this kind of fleet presence would be unstoppable. Against Nemesis, it was helpless. The first ship lost power before the crew even realized they were under attack. The second ship had its communications array severed. It drifted, unable to warn the others. Then Nemesis struck hard. The third and fourth ships vanished in the span of a heartbeat. No explosions, no debris, just erased from existence. By the time the remaining Urdok realized they were doomed, it was already too late. Drake watched the chaos unfold on the monitors. He could almost feel their terror. They were trying to fight a ghost. The Urdok fleet commander's final transmission was cut short as Nemesis delivered the killing blow. Silence returned to space. Vasquez exhaled. That was almost too easy. Drake didn't answer right away. He studied the data. The Urdak still weren't thinking the right way. They were treating this as a normal war, expecting a conventional enemy. They still didn't understand. "We make them understand," Drake murmured. "We don't just hunt them. We break them." On the Urdak homeworld, Commander Valeric was losing control. The reports were worse than he imagined. Squadrons were vanishing inside Urdak space. Warships were being ripped apart before they could even fire a shot. And now something even more disturbing had happened. The survivors, the few broken, terrified Urdak who had managed to escape, were speaking of one thing: a ship. A single, unseen hunter that moved like a shadow. It was impossible, yet here they were, whispering it like some nightmare. Valeric slammed his claws into the war table. "One ship. You're telling me one ship is doing this?" No one dared to answer. The truth was clear. Nemesis wasn't just destroying their fleets, it was killing their morale. For the first time in generations, Urdak commanders hesitated before giving battle orders. Pilots whispered in fear before launching. Soldiers looked over their shoulders, wondering if they would be next. They had never known fear before. Now it was eating them alive. Valeric clenched his jaw. He would not allow this. "I want every warship in the sector to converge," he ordered. "We will trap this ghost and rip it apart." The officers saluted, moving quickly to carry out his command. But deep down, Valeric felt something he had never felt before: a quiet, burning dread. Nemesis listened. From the safety of the void, Drake and his crew intercepted the latest Urdak transmissions. "They're gathering everything they have," Vask said, throwing all their forces into a net. Drake studied the reports, a small smirk forming on his lips. "They think we're trapped." Vasquez chuckled. "They still don't get it, do they?" Drake leaned back, eyes cold. "We're not trapped. They are." Nemesis powered up. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Urdak Empire was done underestimating their unseen enemy. Nemesis had struck from the shadows for too long, tearing apart patrols, hunting squadrons, and crippling entire fleets without ever showing itself. The Urdak had lost more ships in the past few weeks than in a century of conquest. Now, they were going to end it. Commander Valeric had set the trap. Every warship in the sector had been summoned, over 100 battle-hardened Urdak vessels. They formed a net around their core territories, patrolling in overlapping formations, weapons primed to fire at the first sign of trouble. The moment Nemesis revealed itself, it would be obliterated. Or at least, that's what Valeric told himself. Because fear still clung to the air, heavy and suffocating. His own officers hesitated when they spoke. The crews of his warships muttered about ghosts, about shadows, about something unstoppable. Valeric silenced every whisper with a snarl. Nemesis was just a ship, and all ships could be destroyed. Aboard Nemesis, Captain Elias Drake watched the trap tighten. His crew worked in silence, scanning the endless streams of Urdak transmissions. The enemy thought they were being clever, thought they were herding Nemesis into a corner. "They're getting desperate," Vasquez muttered. "They're pulling ships away from key planets just to find us." Drake smirked. "Good. That means we're winning." The Urdak were reacting out of fear, not strategy. They were used to being the hunters, to being the dominant force in every battle. But now they were acting like prey. And Nemesis had no intention of letting them off the hook. Drake turned to his crew. "We're going deeper, straight into their core systems." A few crew members hesitated. Even Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "That's where they're strongest." Drake nodded. "It's also where they feel the safest." Vasquez grinned. "Not for long." Nemesis turned, diving into the heart of enemy space. The first sign that something was wrong came when an Urdak patrol vanished inside their own secured territory. Then a supply station lost contact with its fleet. Then 3 warships stationed near an Urdak colony went dark. Commander Valeric stared at the growing list of casualties, his claws digging into the command table. Impossible. His net was tightening. His forces were in position. And yet, Nemesis had slipped right past them. "Sir," one of his officers turned, panic in his eyes. "The human ship, it's targeting our inner defenses." Valric's blood ran cold. They weren't running. They were escalating. Nemesis wasn't just attacking patrols anymore. It was striking key infrastructure, supply chains, outposts, tearing at the foundation of the Empire itself. A ship like Nemesis couldn't conquer planets. It couldn't invade, but it didn't need to. It was showing the Urdak something far worse than destruction. It was showing them vulnerability. Inside the Nemesis war room, Drake studied the latest Urdak responses. "They're shifting their fleets again," Vask said, "pulling warships away from the front lines just to defend their inner colonies." Drake's eyes darkened. That's how an empire starts to collapse. The Urdak's greatest strength was their size. They conquered aggressively, expanded endlessly, never allowing their enemies a chance to regroup. But now they were spreading themselves thin. They were trying to defend everything at once. And that was a mistake. Drake pointed to the map. Next target. Their fuel reserves. Vaskids grinned. "Oh, that'll hurt." 3 days later, the Urdak High Command was in chaos. Entire fuel depots had been erased, leaving thousands of warships stranded. Supply convoys vanished. Entire fleets sat idle, unable to move. And Nemesis was still out there, somewhere, watching. Commander Valric had never felt so helpless. The human ship was tearing apart his empire piece by piece, not by brute force, not by overwhelming numbers, but through fear, precision, and strategy. Every move he made was anticipated. Every defensive position was circumvented. This wasn't a war. This was execution. Valric slammed his fist against the table. "Find that ship. Now." His officers scrambled, issuing orders. More warships were sent out, entire fleets reallocated. And yet, deep inside, Valric felt something he hated: doubt. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if the Urdak Empire could win. Aboard Nemesis, Drake watched their greatest victory unfold. "Their fleets are a mess," Vask said. "They're so busy trying to defend their core systems that they've abandoned half their outer colonies." Drake nodded. "They're bleeding out." It wouldn't be one massive battle that ended the Urdak. It would be this, the slow, crushing weight of fear and failure. They had taken a human, and now they were paying the price. Drake exhaled, his voice calm. "Let's hit them again." Nemesis turned toward its next target. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Urdak Empire was unraveling. What had started as a single missing patrol had turned into a nightmare. Nemesis had burned fuel reserves, cut supply chains, destroyed outposts, and crippled entire fleets. The war machine of the Urdak, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was grinding to a halt. And worst of all, the Urdak still couldn't catch their enemy. Commander Valric stood at the heart of the Imperial War Command, staring at the latest casualty reports. 17 more warships lost. 3 entire colonies left defenseless. Hundreds of thousands of Urdak citizens were panicking, fearing the next attack. Fear was turning into rebellion. The Empire was built on strength and control. Now both were slipping away. Valric bared his teeth. "Tell me you have something." His officers hesitated. One finally spoke. "We've located a possible target, Commander. A human refugee outpost. The ship must be resupplying somewhere. If we can't find it, we can draw it out." Valric's claws tightened. A human outpost. Helpless civilians. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth. Cowards. He had never needed to target civilians before. The Urdak conquered warriors, not the weak. But Nemesis had left him with no choice. "Send a fleet," he growled. "Level the outpost. Let the humans feel our wrath." If Nemesis wanted to play a war of fear, then Valric would show them true terror. Aboard Nemesis, Captain Ilias Drake's blood ran cold. The moment the Urduk fleet changed course, he knew something was wrong. "They're not chasing us anymore," Vask said, frowning. "They're moving toward." She stopped, her face darkening. "Hell." Drake's fists clenched. The Urduk had figured it out. They couldn't beat Nemesis in open battle. They couldn't hunt them down. So they were going after innocents. A human refugee outpost, one of the last places in the sector where survivors of Urduk conquests had gathered. A place with no defenses, no warships, nothing but families and civilians. Drake's pulse pounded. This was not a battlefield. This was slaughter. "They want us to come to them," Vask said. "They're setting the bait." Drake already knew that. The Urduk weren't being subtle. This was a trap, plain and simple. They were daring Nemesis to show itself. And they thought that would be enough to stop him. Drake's jaw tightened. They had no idea what was coming. The Urduk fleet arrived in orbit over the human outpost, their massive warships blotting out the sky. The refugee camp below had no defenses, no shields, no weapons, nothing but terrified civilians staring up at the horror descending upon them. Valric watched from the bridge of his warship, his claws flexing. Something felt wrong. Yes, they were in position. Yes, they had the advantage. Yes, Nemesis would come. But why did it feel like he was the one stepping into a trap? One of his officers turned. "Commander, we have incoming." The ship shook violently. A blast tore through the lead Urduk battleship, slicing it in half before they could even react. A second warship detonated, explosions tearing through its hull, as if it had been ripped apart from the inside. The crew barely had time to scream before their signals went dark. "Where is it?" Valric bellowed. The Urduk Empire had never known fear, not until now. Nemesis had crippled their fleets, shattered their supply lines, and humiliated their warriors. The once mighty Urduk, who had crushed entire civilizations under their rule, were now fighting to survive. But the Urduk were not done yet. Commander Valric stood before the Urduk High Council, his body tense, his pride bleeding from every wound Nemesis had inflicted. His scars told the story of his failures, but his eyes burned with the promise of vengeance. "The human ship has made us weak," one of the counselors hissed. "It has turned us into prey." Valric's claws dug into his palms. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The truth was undeniable. The Empire was collapsing, and it was because of one ship. One human ship. It was an insult that could never be forgiven. Another counselor leaned forward. "What is your solution, Valric? What will end this humiliation?" Valric's voice was steady, but beneath it was a storm. "We stop hunting Nemesis. We stop chasing it. Stop trying to fight it as an equal." His claws scraped against the metal table. "Instead, we rip out its heart." Silence fell over the chamber. The Urduk had tried military force. They had tried traps. They had tried sheer overwhelming power. And they had failed every time. Now, Valric was suggesting something different. "Where do humans come from?" he asked coldly. The counselors exchanged glances. "Earth," one of them said, "but their homeworld is too far, too well defended." Valric finished. "Yes, we cannot strike Earth, but humanity does not fight alone. They have allies, refugees, hidden outposts." He let the words sink in. "If we cannot kill Nemesis, then we force it to surrender. We take hostages. We burn their colonies. We make them watch as we destroy everything they care about." The council remained still. This was not the Urduk way. The Urduk fought warriors, not civilians. But that code had given them nothing but defeat. One of the counselors nodded grimly. "Do what you must." Valric felt the weight of the order settle on his shoulders. He had been given permission to burn. Aboard Nemesis, Captain Elias Drake studied the latest Urduk movements. Something had changed. "They're moving away from us," Vask muttered, "pulling fleets back. No more hunting parties." Drake didn't like it. "They're not retreating," he murmured. their shifting focus. His fingers tapped against the metal console. The Urdok weren't cowards. If they had stopped chasing Nemesis, it meant they had found another target. Drake's eyes darkened. Pull up all human-controlled sectors. Find out where they're headed. Vasquez worked fast, scanning intercepted Urdok transmissions. The moment she found it, she froze. "Drake," she whispered. Drake turned. His stomach dropped. The Urdok weren't hunting him anymore. They were hunting his people. Valric's fleet descended like a storm. The human colony, Haven's Reach, had been a quiet settlement, far from the front lines. It had no defenses, no weapons, no soldiers. Only farmers, engineers, families. They had thought they were safe. Now, they screamed as the sky turned to fire. Valric watched from the bridge of his warship, his jaw tight. This was not war. This was punishment. "Destroy their communications," he ordered. "Let Nemesis feel their silence." The colony's distress signals were cut off. The humans below had no way to call for help. Valric knew what would happen next. Nemesis would come. It had to. And when it did, it would finally be trapped. Drake had never moved so fast in his life. The moment Nemesis detected the attack, it burned through the void, engines screaming. Every second lost was a second Haven's Reach suffered. Every moment wasted meant more civilians died. His hands clenched the controls. The Urdok wanted to lure him in. They wanted him to be reckless, desperate. And maybe he was. But they had made a mistake. They thought Nemesis was just a ship. They thought its strength came from stealth, tactics, and firepower. But Nemesis was more than that. It was rage. It was humanity's answer to cruelty. And tonight, it was going to remind the Urdok why they should have feared it. The moment Nemesis entered the system, the Urdok fleet opened fire. Massive plasma bolts screamed through the void. Energy lances ripped through space. But Nemesis was too fast. Drake weaved through the fire, avoiding their weapons with surgical precision. They had waited for him to come, but they had underestimated how furious he was. "Lock on targets," he ordered. "Start cutting them down." Nemesis struck like lightning. The first Urdok cruiser never had a chance. A railgun round tore through its hull, detonating its reactor. The second warship tried to turn, but Nemesis was already behind it, plasma cannons melting through its engines. The trap was falling apart. Valric snarled, watching his forces crumble. "Ignore the ship," he roared. "Destroy the colony." His remaining warships turned their weapons downward. Drake saw it happen. He saw the Urdok targeting innocent people. And something inside him snapped. Nemesis became something else. It was no longer fighting a battle. It was delivering vengeance. It ripped through the Urdok fleet, moving too fast for them to counter, striking too precisely for them to escape. One after another, the Urdok ships fell. They had thought they could outlast Nemesis, but there was no outlasting human fury. Valric's warship was the last one standing. His crew was in chaos. His fleet was gone. His plan had failed. And now Nemesis was coming for him. His officers turned. "Commander." The ship shook violently. Drake's voice crackled through the comms. "You wanted me, Valric." His voice was ice. "Now you've got me." The last Urdok warship never stood a chance. Drake fired everything. A railgun shot tore through its hull. A barrage of missiles ripped it apart. The Urdok never even had time to scream. And just like that, it was over. The colony was safe. Nemesis hovered above the burning wreckage of the Urdok fleet, watching the last embers of the battle fade. Vasquez exhaled. "We did it." Drake stared at the wreckage. His jaw was tight. "No," he murmured. "We won this fight." His hands curled into fists. "But they'll be back." Because the Urdok Empire had just suffered its worst defeat. And now, there was only one move left for them. They would throw everything they had into one last war. And Nemesis would be waiting. For the final battle. The Urdok Empire was bleeding. Nemesis had crushed their fleets, burned their warships, and humiliated their commanders. For the first time in history, the Urdak were not the hunters. They were the hunted. But the Urdak were not dead. Not yet. And now, they were coming with everything they had. Urdak High Command, War Council Chambers. The Great War Hall of the Urdak was filled with rage and desperation. The highest-ranking warlords stood around a massive holographic display, watching as reports poured in from across the empire. The damage was unthinkable. Nemesis had crippled their supply lines. Their war fleets were scattered or destroyed. Their colonies were on the edge of revolt. One ship had done all this. One human ship. This cannot continue. Supreme Warlord Xavalik growled, his claws carving deep scars into the metal table. This insult must be washed away in blood. Valric, standing among the other warlords, did not argue. He had led the last fleet against Nemesis, and he had failed. He bore the shame of it, but now they would end this war. Xavalik turned, his red eyes glowing with fury. We have only one option left. We will strike with everything we have. Every warship, every soldier. A single, unstoppable assault, not to hunt Nemesis. His voice dropped lower. To annihilate humanity itself. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Even among the Urdak, this was madness. Destroying a civilization, slaughtering an entire species. But Xavalik saw no other choice. Nemesis is more than a ship, he growled. It is a symbol. As long as it exists, the Empire will never be safe. His voice darkened. So we burn everything. Valric exhaled slowly. This was it. The final war. The last battle that would decide everything. Aboard Nemesis, Captain Elias Drake listened to the intercepted Urdak transmission. His hands curled into fists. They're done playing games, Vasquez whispered. They're bringing everything. Drake's jaw tightened. The Urdak had never done this before. They had always fought with strategy, conquest, control. Now they were coming with pure rage. They weren't just trying to kill Nemesis. They were trying to wipe out humanity. The weight of it sank into his bones. Drake stood, his expression like steel. Then we stopped them. Vasquez blinked. Drake, it's their whole fleet. The entire empire is moving. Drake nodded. Then we end the war in one battle. His voice was calm, because he knew what had to be done. Nemesis had never been about survival. It had never been about running. It had always been about answering war with war. And now, humanity's answer would be final. The battle began at the edge of human space. Hundreds of Urdak warships erupted from hyperspace, their weapons glowing with power, a wall of destruction. And against them, waiting in the void, Nemesis, just one ship. A single black shadow against the endless swarm of Urdak warships. It should have been a massacre. But Nemesis had never been afraid of the impossible. Drake sat in the command chair, eyes locked on the screens. Begin the attack. Nemesis vanished. Then it struck. The first Urdak battleship never had a chance. A railgun fired from nowhere, tearing through its core like a spear through flesh. The warship detonated instantly. Before the fleet could react, Nemesis reappeared behind them, launching a storm of missiles into their exposed flanks. 3 more warships vanished in fire. And then Nemesis was gone again. It was everywhere and nowhere, moving faster than the Urdak could track. Panic spread. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see. Nemesis was one ship, but it fought like an entire armada. But the Urdak had numbers. For every warship Nemesis destroyed, more arrived. The fleet swarmed, forcing Nemesis into the open. Drake gritted his teeth. The ship shook under the impact of enemy fire. We can't dodge everything, Vasquez warned. They're boxing us in. Drake exhaled. The Urdak thought they had finally cornered Nemesis. They thought this was the end. They were wrong. Drake turned to his crew. His voice was calm, steady, unshaken. Activate the last protocol. The Urduk fleet never saw it coming. Suddenly, Nemesis stopped moving. The ship hovered, completely exposed. A signal pulsed from its core. And then, the trap closed. From the darkness of space, hundreds of human warships erupted into the battlefield. The Urduk had been so focused on Nemesis, they hadn't seen the fleet waiting in the void. The moment the human armada arrived, the battle changed. The Urduk fleet collapsed in chaos. Plasma fire ripped through their ranks. Missiles tore through their capital ships. Human warships surged forward, pushing the Urduk back. And Nemesis led the charge. Valric watched in horror from his warship. It was over. He had been outplayed, outmaneuvered. His great fleet was dying. The Urduk Empire, the mighty warlords of the galaxy, had lost. And as his ship shook violently, alarms blaring, flames consuming the bridge, Valric let out a slow breath. They had feared Nemesis. They had tried to stop it, but they had never understood. Nemesis wasn't just a ship. It was humanity's answer to war. And that answer was final. The battle ended. The Urduk fleet was destroyed. Their empire was broken. The war was over. Vasquez exhaled, staring at the wreckage. We did it. Drake leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. It was done. Nemesis had answered. And the galaxy would never forget. Humanity had been tested. And, in the end, they had answered with fire and fury.